Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Dave White, Deputy Director of the ASU Global Institute of Sustainability and Innovation. Our institute discusses a range of environmental, social, and economic topics at these occasional Sustainability Series events. But today's event is the first in a series of virtual talks in partnership with Island Press, a nonprofit book publisher that shines a spotlight on crucial issues and focuses attention on sustainable solutions. In addition to our honored guest, Professor Jennie C. Stephens, we'll be welcoming 4 additional Island Press authors who have books coming out this fall. We thank Jen Hawes, Partnership Manager for Island Press, for bringing us these thought leaders whose work lies at the intersection of climate change, housing, energy transition, and activism. It is now my pleasure to introduce Chris Mays. Chris is Professor of Practice in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society in the new College of Global Futures, as well as Director of ASU's Utility of the Future Center. You can add honorable to Chris's titles, as she served on the Arizona Corporation Commission from 2003 to 2010 and is considered the mother of Arizona's renewable energy standard. Chris, welcome.
Thanks, Dave. I'm so thrilled to be here today and to be your moderator, and welcome our speaker. Jennie Stephens directs the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs and is the Dean's Professor of Sustainability Science and Policy at Northeastern University in Boston. She also directs the Strategic Research Collaborations at Northeastern's Global Resilience Institute and is affiliated with the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program, the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering there, and the Department of Culture, Societies, and Global Studies. Her research, teaching, and community engagement integrates social justice, feminist, and anti-racist perspectives into climate and energy resilience, social and political aspects of renewable energy transition, reducing reliance on fossil fuels, energy democracy, gender and energy and climate and energy justice. Dr. Stephens' transdisciplinary approach integrates innovations in social science and public policy with science and engineering to promote social justice, reduce inequalities, and redistribute power, whether it's electric power, economic power, or political power. She is here today, and we are super excited about this, to talk about her new book with Island Press entitled Diversifying Power, Why We Need Antiracist Feminist Leadership on Climate and Energy. And I will tell you, you got to go buy this book, go grab this book. It's fantastic. I've been reading it this week, so I'm looking forward to the conversation. As a reminder, before we begin, we are going to have a Q&A session, so put your questions into the chat Q&A feature, and we will get to as many as we possibly can. So Jennie, take it away.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Dave, and thank you to Island Press and ASU for inviting me to this, hosting me for this discussion. I'm hoping this book really tries to be optimistic about and elevate the stories of leaders that many of us may not know about, some of them we may know about, who are really acknowledging and connecting the climate and energy crises that we face with the other crises that are also we are also facing right now very explicitly, including economic crisis, health crisis, racial justice crisis, and structural racism, and all kinds of other challenges that we're currently facing, particularly during this pandemic. So I welcome the opportunity to have this discussion, and thank you for having me. I think I will start by acknowledging one of the things. I've worked in climate and energy for over 20 years now, and increasingly I have been kind of frustrated with the lack of effectiveness of our policies and our action. And what I have learned, and I have a science and engineering background, is that we have not been investing enough. We've been investing a lot in technological innovation, not enough in social innovation, which allows us to center social justice and consider social change. And so really that is part of the message, and what I wanted to, that I'm trying to do with this book, is emphasize the possibilities of engaging more explicitly on social innovation. Let me see here, sorry, just don't seem to be able to move the slide. Oh, here we go. So just to give you a sense of, this is a non-academic book. It's a publicly accessible book that is a synthesis of a lot of ideas and people that I've talked to and met and organizations that I'm familiar with. So I wanted to just give you a sense of where I'm coming from writing this book. I was first born in Ireland. So I moved to the United States when I was 8. I studied first environmental science and policy with a focus on water, then had a technical PhD and master's, thinking about water, soil, and carbon. And that led back to my policy interests, where I did postdoctoral work focusing on energy technology innovation, where I worked with a lot of energy experts, mostly with the technical framing. And then I was a professor at Clark University, the University of Vermont, and now I am at Northeastern, where I've been for the past 4 years. And I mention this in part just to share kind of my background and the intersection of social science and technological science and engineering, because it's critical to the points that I'm making. So I really propose that the climate crisis is a crisis in leadership, and that climate justice is racial justice, and they're intricately connected. So I want to elevate and explain what I mean by that. Climate isolationism is the phrase that I have coined to kind of demonstrate and characterize the narrow technocratic lens by which we have been engaging on climate discourse and focusing a lot of our climate policy, which is really technocratic, focused on greenhouse gas emission reductions, decarbonization, potentially carbon pricing mechanisms. All of this is, you know, technical lens, and it's based on kind of certain assumptions about domination and control and how things work. And we're really missing opportunities for improving the human condition because we haven't been focusing enough on social change, social justice, and social innovation. So an alternative lens that I propose is energy democracy, which is acknowledging that we need to move away from a fossil fuel-based system to an renewable-based society. And when we do that, that's actually a big shift. And it's not just about the technology, but it's also about reconfiguring ownership, power, and who is benefiting and profiting, and who's included and who's excluded from our energy systems. So when we move toward a renewable-based system, and a renewable-based future isn't just wind and solar, there could be locally appropriate mix. If you're on the coast, you could have wind and wave and tidal, as well as offshore wind. If you're inland, you could have geothermal, as well as wind and solar and hydro of different kinds. And you could really have local, regionally appropriate, heterogeneous mix of renewable sources. And the important thing to remember is that the reason renewables are so powerful is once you've figured out a way to leverage and harness that energy, it's perpetual, it's abundant, and it's free. So really moving toward a renewable-based society is much bigger than just a technological switch. It really is about redistributing power, literally and figuratively. So if you embrace that lens, you can see how we need broad investments in people and communities. And as we invest in energy, in our energy system, we can base that on social justice and human dignity and invest in what people need, what our families need and communities need, and we can leverage the urgency of the climate crisis for a bigger social transformation. So I explain that by connecting it with the economic injustice of what has been happening, particularly in the United States. This has been happening around the world, but particularly in the United States, with this widening income and wealth gap. Many of us are sort of familiar with this, but many don't really realize how bad it has gotten just in the past few decades. And here, this figure here shows the share of national income with the top 1% has gone from about 10% to 20%, and the lower 50% has declined about the same magnitude. And with wealth, the gap is even wider, and this is continuing until we have some big transformative change. And the reason it's continuing, it's not an accident. It's actually very intentional, this concentration of wealth and power. And it's by the 1%, or a lot of people are now considering the polluter elite, who are shareholders, fossil fuel interests, rich individuals and organizations that have been profiting from our fossil fuel system. They really have been actively investing to strategically resist a transformation toward a renewable-based society. So some of the strategies they've been investing in for decades is a misinformation campaign to deny climate science. Many of us are quite well aware of how effective that has been. But they've also been undermining public trust in government, reducing protections for us that the government provides, and minimizing worker protections and worker rights and unions. And really, there's been a corporate shift over these few decades so that corporations aren't prioritizing their workers and their employees. Instead, they are prioritizing shareholder interests. So what is really needed I think, to transform our economic system and our energy system is anti-racist feminist leadership. And what I mean by that is leadership that is based on collaboration, inclusivity, and participation. The Squad are 4 young congresswomen who have come onto the national scene just in the past couple of years, and they have demonstrated anti-racist feminist leadership and in very effective ways, and shown how practical perspective on what people need and calling out the 1% and the traditional way of doing things as inadequate and unacceptable, it can be so powerful. And obviously that group has been known as the Squad, and they've been targets of racist and misogynistic attacks, and they persist and have been really powerful in what they have been able to accomplish in terms of changing the discourse. And they're really focused, and this kind of leadership is focused on distributing wealth and power, prioritizing investments in communities and workers' rights, reducing inequities and disparities by centering social justice and racial justice in all of our policies, and then leveraging the transformation by linking these problems, acknowledging that none of our problems are in isolation, and that we really have opportunities when we connect them. And obviously that is in contrast to patriarchal conventional leadership that's based on domination and control, and really exclusion, very intentional exclusion of many people. And it's that exclusion is to concentrate wealth and power and prioritize the investments to maximize corporate profits, and all of that exacerbates inequities in racial and gender disparities. And one of the things, the key strategy of the conventional leadership is to deny the problems that we have. So not only are people denying that we have a climate crisis, but they're also now denying that we have an economic crisis, denying even the pandemic, that we have a healthcare access crisis, and denying that we have structural racism and racial injustice crisis. So what I do in the book is really elevate the stories of inspiring, motivating leaders who are doing amazing things. And so I'll quickly just kind of go through a few of the examples of people who are really having a big impact, and but don't always get the recognition that they deserve. Jackie Patterson of the NAACP heads up their environmental and climate justice program, and she and her team put together a very robust program and this report called Fossil Fueled Foolery that explicitly calls out the fossil fuel industry and demonstrates how the fossil fuel interests have manipulated and co-opted Black communities around the country, oftentimes giving them money in response, or some kind of financial support in response for, in return for support for fossil fuel investments, and other strategies, including voter suppression and you know, reducing the power of our democracy in multiple ways. Other leaders that have been resisting the polluter elite include Jasmine Banks, and many of us are familiar with the Koch brothers and their influence in terms of the fossil fuel interests and their strategies of influencing our educational systems and our court systems and our criminal justice system. So Uncoke My Campus is an organization that calls out and holds those, reveals those influences in an attempt to reduce the influence that they've had. Maura Healey is an example of a leader here in Massachusetts who has taken on, she's the Attorney General here, and she has taken on ExxonMobil directly by lawsuits accusing them of greenwashing and being perpetuating unfair information about fossil fuels. So I want to connect then with leaders who are really connecting climate and energy with jobs and economic justice. Varshini Prakash is one of the leaders of and founders of the Sunrise Movement, and she has really been phenomenal in building this youth movement that is really pulling collective, collaborative leadership and really motivating, and has had a huge impact in getting the Green New Deal on the national agenda. And obviously Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is another key leader, one of the members of the squad, who has been calling out and connecting economic justice issues and the guaranteed jobs with the Green New Deal. We also have leaders who are particularly focusing on workforce training, and with all the new jobs being created with renewable energy transformation, making sure that people are trained, communities and workers who've been excluded from the energy sector previously, or excluded from some of the subsidies and benefits that have been allocated for renewable energy, making sure that those individuals and communities have access to jobs. So Grid Alternatives is a national organization that does solar installation with workforce training. Esteban Kelly is the leader of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives that connects the notion of cooperative with renewable energy. And Rowena Altmos is a leader here in Boston with a small organization called All In Energy that's connecting energy efficiency and weatherization jobs with low-income communities that have been disproportionately excluded from getting the benefits of energy efficiency investments. So all of these people are focusing on the precarity, resisting the precarity of that we have become accustomed to in this country, that's become so widespread, and really reclaiming the possibilities and the potential of public investment and restructuring for more inclusive prosperity. The next chapter of my book focuses on leaders who are connecting climate and energy with health, well-being, and nutritious food for all. Robert Bullard, often known as the father of environmental justice, is among the first to do research that demonstrated how Black communities were being disproportionately impacted on their health from fossil fuel and other facilities, industrial facilities. Mildred McLean, the Harambee House Citizens for Environmental Justice, is well known for saying, you know, we are sick and tired of being sick and tired, and elevating not just the exposures that Black communities have, but also their lack of access to healthcare. Gina McCarthy has been a leader that is, who's for decades now been elevating the value of connecting climate with health, and really pointing to the connections. She's currently the head of the NRDC, but she was previously Obama's EPA administrator, and she has been, at this point, many communities and cities have actually declared the climate crisis a public health emergency. So that has been shifting. Jillian Hishaw is a lawyer and advocate for Black farmers. Mustafa Santiago Ali is an activist who has been standing up for Black communities and pointing out the disparities there with Black communities in terms of climate impacts as well as climate mitigation strategies. Dorcetta Taylor of University of Michigan is the researcher who first pointed out how the whiteness of the environmental movement in the United States and how that has led to you know, a specific focus within the environmental community that has not been inclusive. And I mentioned here Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, when we talk about health, because she has also demonstrated how New Zealand right now is being held up as one of the countries that has been the most effective in managing the coronavirus. And Taiwan, Denmark, and Germany, other countries led by women, have also been more effective. And a lot of the, it seems like the characteristics of this leadership that has led to more effective responses is, you know, looking at the evidence, taking strong early measures, and then communicating with empathy and compassion that not only is you know, to do this, take these measures for your own health and for the health of your family, but the collective health of the community and the country as a whole. With regard to transportation, we have some really inspiring leaders who have changed the transportation discourse. Representative Ayanna Presley, who is actually my representative here in Massachusetts, she is head of the Transportation Caucus, and she has always centered transit justice in her priorities. And also here in Boston, Michelle Wu is a Boston City Councilor who has just announced she'll be running for mayor here in Boston, and she just released her Green New Deal for Boston, and it includes free public transportation, which in our conventional sense is, you know, people say that's impossible. We can't. How are we going to afford free public transportation? But if you have a social justice lens and priority, you can see how providing free public transportation opens up opportunities for communities and for workers to have broaden opportunities for economic equity, and that it really also, you know, if you think about the price of getting on the bus or the subway, it's a very regressive mechanism, because it's much more expensive and a big expense for families and individuals on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. So I also mentioned here Greta Thunberg, because she obviously has elevated the transportation connections with her innovative approach to getting over to North America and back last year when she sailed across the Atlantic rather than taking an airplane. So I also want to just emphasize housing and the connections with climate, energy, and housing. Representative Ilhan Omar, another member of the squad, has been very outspoken in the need for public housing, investments in public housing. And now with the pandemic, we have a real housing insecurity crisis, and it's getting worse, as many of us are very much aware. And there are leaders like in Oakland, Moms for Housing is a group of 4 mothers who were homeless and started living in a vacant house in Oakland, and they were evicted using a full military style tanks and guns in the middle of the night, moving them out of the house that they were living in, and they used that as an opportunity to leverage the disparities and inequities of housing, particularly thinking about how the housing crisis has just been getting so much worse, and how they're empty homes that are empty at the same time with developers at the same time where there are people really in desperate need of housing. And the last example here is some Indigenous women in Canada, the tiny house warriors, who have used their idea and sense of home as the land being their home in protest of the pipeline, the transnational pipeline going across Canada, with the tiny homes that are on wheels that they've been building and moving to as blockades to block the pipeline building. So those are an overview of some of the examples that I highlight in the book. And I want to end by just saying that we are in this moment in human history where I think we really need to come together and acknowledge our collective power, and business as usual isn't working. We need a transformative lens to move to a better place and a more prosperous and sustainable future for all. There are lots of ways we can all get involved and act to inspire new leaders. And when we talk about leadership, we're not just talking about elected officials. We are talking about all of us. We can all be leaders in our communities, in our families, in the organizations that we work for, and we need to be advocating for system change and understanding and unlearning the racism and sexism that is so deeply ingrained. Obviously, a few weeks out from the election here in the United States, we need to be focusing on voting, helping others to vote, making sure that that politics of exclusion is not perpetuated. We also really want to be focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion everywhere, advocating for local community renewable energy, and leveraging data, science, and information for the transformative change that we're hoping for, and supporting cooperatives and novel economic structures, and then really connecting across the divide and listening and learning to each other. And in that regard, Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, she has been influential in climate justice internationally, and is really focused on a people's first approach. If we can overcome the divisiveness if we focus on what do people need, what do families need, what investments do our communities need, and move away from the corporate priority that has led to so many of our failed national level policies. And to close, I'll just honor Shirley Chisholm, who was the first Black woman to run for president in 1972. And in some ways, we've come a long way, and in other ways, we really have not come a long way since then. So with that, I would love to open it up for questions and discussion. And I will just mention that the book, all author proceeds from the book will be going to NAACP's Environmental and Climate Justice Program. And I hope that this book, inspires the kinds of conversations that we can have today, and also brings some optimism in a time that's really hard for so many people with so much suffering and hardship. And the optimism really comes with the new multiracial, multi-generational coalitions that are forming in response to where we are right now. So thank you all for your time, and I look forward to the conversation.